Good morning, everyone. Am I audible?
Morning, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. So we will continue our discussion on debugging and its methods. So in our last class, we talked about brute force way of trying to identify the problem in the code. So normally, if you can see, this is the approach that we normally follow in a very unsystematic manner. So basically, you try to change the thing that you think is most likely to be causing the bug, and so in a very arbitrary manner, should I say. And if it works, then you stop thinking more over the problem. If it doesn't really work, then you second guess the solution, and this thing goes on. So this is also one of the examples of how we generally think when we talk about brute force way of identifying or the problem and trying to solve it. Sometimes, however, what can happen is that we can quickly run out of our guesses if we follow an unsystematic approach. And most often than not, we can land up in such a situation in which we have tried to change something, but it doesn't really work, and we keep on pushing for it. And at time comes when we are really out of ideas, and it is very easy to get frustrated and sort of deeply upset about the fact that we have not been able to locate the problem or identify it and try to solve it. So these are some of the you know disadvantage, I would not say disadvantages, but you're wasting, basically you're wasting your precious energy in trying to solve the error and going in an unsystematic manner. So you end up wasting your precious energy when you don't go in a systematic manner. So um, that is why we need to be aware of certain tactics and strategies that we must know when we go about debugging our code. So we will talk about debugging by induction. So again, as I always say, don't uh, put too much of attention into the word, but try to understand what that word means in the context of debugging. So basically, induction in general, also in scientific theory, induction and deduction are two schools of thoughts when it comes to developing knowledge. So in this particular case for debugging, what we generally do is in induction, you are moving from you're collecting the available information. So basically you try to see that you try to observe and try to collect all the information that you can about the bug that you have seen, the observed failure, and some known facts concerning the successful test cases. So basically you are deeply studying the bug that is on your table, and then you sort of try to look for the patterns. And once you have understood, so basically when you're collecting the available information, basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to understand the bug that has really happened. And then you're trying to collect the parameters in sort of knowledge ways, such that they can tell you, okay, this is what is happening and this is why the error is occurring. So based on that, you form few hypotheses. So hypothesis would generally mean that you guess that this could be the reason, this could be the reason, or it could not be. So basically you are following, you're forming a set of hypotheses. And then once you have understood the bug that is occurring and the prevailing environment, and you have formed the hypothesis, then you go on to systematically refute or reject or accept the hypothesis. And then based on how each of these hypotheses is being accepted or rejected, then you go on to implement your appropriate corrections, and then you verify the correction. So overall, I hope you can appreciate what is happening in debugging by induction is that you start off in a very general manner. You're collecting all the information, okay, then you're looking for patterns and you are forming the hypothesis based on the information that you have about the observed failure, okay. And then step by step you sort of prove or disprove each hypothesis until and unless you arrive at a point wherein you are convinced, okay, this is the cause and this is the, then you can go about formulating the correction. So briefly, this can be understood as, you locate pertinent data. So pertinent means that relevant to the context of the bug that you have identified. You organize the data related to the bug. You try to study the relationship. So more or less, it's like basically a data analytic approach in which a statistician is given some data and is trying to read the variables before trying to understand what insight can be gained from the variables. And once he or she knows that, then they can deploy specific statistical methods, you know to extract that kind of information. So analogously, this is also how it works in debugging by induction approach. Basically, you're processing from particulars to the general. So this is motivated by the fact that most of the times, human debuggers generally don't take into account all the available data or symptoms about the problem. So, if we are not sufficiently familiar with the bug that is occurring, then it will be very difficult to go about solving it. Most of the times in industries, whenever a bug is assigned to the developer tries to understand the bug. Obviously, wants to replicate the bug, and then notes down the exact steps that lead to the uh, occurrence of that bug. So that is how he or she proceeds systematically. Once he has understood uh, the flow that is really causing that bug, then he or she can narrow down into that particular situation and then try to find a solution. So important thing in this aspect of debugging by induction is, uh, as you can notice, in contrast to brute force, you start off with some baseline piece of information about the bug and the environment in which it is occurring. So that is the first step that takes you forward to identifying or localizing the bug. In contrast, debugging by deduction, you proceed from general theories or premises, and you use the process of elimination and refinement to arrive at a conclusion. So imagine it as a murder mystery, and you have been given the responsibility to sort of find out that who is the culprit. So there are two ways you can go about it. Induction approach would mean that you start with set of clues and then gradually induce who is the suspect. Whereas in deduction approach, you start with a set of suspects and then once by one, by process of elimination using the clues, you deduce who is the suspect. So similarly in debugging by deduction, what you are doing is you first list all the possible causes and hypotheses. And there is sometimes a possibility of overlap between these two approaches, because personally I believe even to formulate certain hypotheses, you need to have a sense of familiarity with the bug that is occurring. So gathering of knowledge cannot be totally eliminated. However, in deduction, basically, you start with at least some hunch about what could be the cause of the error, and then one by one, using the available data, you eliminate the possible causes, and then you go on to refine the hypothesis that you had formed in the first place, because this is more like an experimental thing going on here. So basically, you are sort of doing an experiment for each particular hypothesis, and then you're refining your hypothesis, and then basically you move on to fix the problem when you have really narrowed down to the hypothesis. But again, this is a very linear way of trying to understand debugging by induction or deduction. But I think more than allowing yourself to get lost in the terminologies, the important thing to take away from these concepts is how you are being taught to think about the bug that is on the table. So obviously you can follow an approach which could be a mix of both, depending on the context in which you are approaching up you know working. But what is important is to focus on the thought process behind the induction and deduction. How the creator of these methods has really thought about dealing with the bugs that you find. So number one thing that should stand out is the fact that you need to have good amount of understanding of the problem that is occurring. As we had talked in our initial lectures, understanding of the problem and analyzing of the problem is critical to be able to tackle that problem and solve that problem. Similar is the case in case of debugging, unless and until, first of all, you need to get convinced that yes, there is a bug, and you need to sufficiently, assert it multiple times that okay, this is really occurring and it needs some serious attention. And then you gather, at least the flow which is leading to this problem and the other data, and then you try to narrow down or localize the source of the error. Sometimes we can, get to the root cause of the error pretty immediately. Sometimes we may start off from A, and we approach to debugging, so we go from A to B. So first we thought that okay, A is the cause, but we eliminate it. So then, but in the process of elimination, we get to know no, A is linked to B, so B could be the cause. And then similar fashion, we study B and then move on to, say X, Y, and then we finally arrive at the root cause, and then we can try to fix it. So 95% of the process of debugging involves, identifying the root cause and then trying to solve it. So this diagram basically shows the deductive debugging approach. You enumerate the possible causes in the first step, and then you use process of elimination, and you go on to do this until none of the uh, causes are left. In which case you collect more data. Otherwise, by using process of elimination, you refine the hypothesis and you prove remaining hypothesis, and then eventually if you can find the source of the error, you fix the error. But I'll reinforce the fact, not to get too much caught up in the terminologies, but to permit yourself to have a taste of the thought process behind it, and always keep room for flexibility when you're trying to solve a particular bug. Because what normally happens is when we get too much caught up in the approach, we lose that ability to think flexibly. And if we become too rigid in our some methods, it can really block our expansion of thinking for a particular problem. So or even though you might want to focus on a particular approach, but don't be always too rigid in any approach that you're following. Okay, so the fourth method of debugging is debugging by backtracking. So in this particular method, you start off at some point and then you are backtracking to the point wherein everything appears to work fine until when. So again, you see some cause, but that is not a, it's like when you're going for a trek, there are many situations in which you end up on a pseudo peak, and then there is something called as the actual real peak from which the viewpoint is very clear. So similar to that kind of analogy, think of backtracking as arriving at pseudo peak, and then again trying to analyze that particular thing and really trying to reason if this is actual cause. If it's not, then again backtrack to where it is coming from. So this is how you go on to the root of the problem. But again, try to look at the thought process behind the word backtracking in this context of debugging, in which you are looking for the location of the problem between the point where the state of the program was what you expected it to be, and the first point where the state of the program was not what it was expected to be. So this is how you go on to uh, approaching the debugging by backtracking problem, and it's more of an experimental thing. So, but there are some things to be kept in mind. Whenever you are debugging on certain problem, you can be in two states. Either you are testing a theory or you are gathering data to come up with a suitable theory. Remember, when you are debugging, basically you are doing something called as hypothesis testing. You make a hypothesis, okay, this is the cause, and then you follow a systematic approach whether to see, to reject or accept the hypothesis. If you are able to reject it, then you move on to the next, and then this is how you try to identify the problem. uh, it is important to remember not to get fumble, not to just fumble around randomly in trying to find the error. And it is very uh, easy to get lost in debugging when you're working on a huge code base, and that is where following a systematic approach is all the more important. So everything that you do while debugging should lead you closer to the cause of the error. So this is what your approach should be when you are trying to debug a problem. So let us try to take an example of this thing. So suppose there is a program that is supposed to save, you know, document to the user's home directory, but it is most of the time saving the user's document to the root directory. So this is the error that is happening. So there is a program that is supposed to save some documents in user's home directory, but it is sometimes saving those users documents in the root directory. Now, what can you make some guesses of why this could be happening? What are the possible things that you can think of that could be leading to this kind of situation?
Environment variables.
Sorry?
Environment variables.
For example, like if you can elaborate more on that.
Generally, if environment variables are not correct, that directories which it saves may be different or something.
Okay. So, right, there must be some other function which may be dealing with this function that is storing the files, and that could be changing something in the environment that it is not able to save the document in the user's home directory. So, let us see. There were a few of the functions. So, maybe there was a function in which it was failing to identify the user for some reason. And because of that, it was not able to identify the user's, home directory, and therefore was falling back to the root directory. So this is one of the causes that, you know, that the developer guessed. The second was relating more to the permission. So it was able to identify the user's home directory, but whenever it went on to write that document in the home directory, somehow the program was not getting the permission, and that as a result, it was defaulting it to the root directory. And the third case, as Tarun mentioned, was there was some function which was very integral to this feature of saving the documents, but it was somehow interfering with the functionality. So this is just a very brief example to show you how to think of the possible causes. And but the actual problem was in this particular case a problem with permission. And when the problem was discovered, then the appropriate permissions were given to the function to solve this kind of bug. Moving forward, there is another approach away from debugging by brute force, induction, deduction, and backtracking, something called as debugging by testing. And this is what we most of the time do. So when we talk about making test cases for debugging, what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify or gain more information useful for locating that particular suspected error in your program. So whereas when you form test cases for testing, and as we will move studying in our next set of lectures, that there is actually a master test plan. So test cases for testing have a very different objective than test cases for debugging. At one case, test cases for testing help you to try to cover many conditions and identify what is not functioning really well. Whereas test cases for debugging help you to understand the one single condition or one single suspected error that is really causing that particular bug in your system. So this is how also, and debugging by testing is not isolated from hypothesis and testing. So basically here again you are forming certain set of hypotheses and you're trying to validate or invalidate those hypotheses by what you're observing in the process of testing. So going on, we will discuss some of the basic debugging tactics using examples. So one of the common approaches is to comment out the code. So if your program is exhibiting some erroneous behavior, so one way to reduce the amount of code you have to search it through commenting some piece of code and see if the issue still persists. So if this is sort of a function in which you're trying to sort the name of people in some sort of alphabetical order, and somehow it is not returning the expected result. So what you can do is you can try to comment out some piece of code and then see if the issue really exists even then. So in this particular example, suppose this particular function is coded out. So the user felt that that because get names, sort names, and print names seem to be functions that were related sort of closely to the sorting of the name. So this person, wanted to observe whether commenting out this do maintenance function really replicated the problem or not. So what happens is, if the problem persists even after commenting out this particular code, what does this mean? What would it mean if the problem remains after you've commented and
The both are independent.
okay,
The commented line is not dependent on the error. I mean, it's not causing the error.
okay, and if somehow the problem is not seen after commenting, then what could it mean? And what would be the possible next steps?
By commenting other part and closing this, or what see the result, what happened.
Okay, because when you comment it out and you sort of the problem goes away, then the function could be the cause of the problem, or you might need to look at its implementation if it's interfering with the overall success of the program. If the problem is persisting, that function is not the problem, but at least you have identified that that particular function is not a part of the problem. So that alone is a step in the positive direction, because even though you have not been able to isolate the cause of the error, but at least you have been able to identify that that particular piece of code is not related to the error. So that is also success in some manner. So commenting out code is one of the approaches uh, you know to suspecting the localization cause of the bug that you have identified. So look at this code, and I'll try to run this code for you. Then you need to tell me what is the problem with that particular code. So this is a very simple example I will try to show you. So what just try to see for yourself what is happening in this particular piece of code, and I run it. Okay, and then you explain to me why the result is what it is.
The function is not called.
Just a second. Yeah, so this value is getting printed, so what exactly is happening in this particular situation?
That's the address of the function, because the get value function is printed, not called. If we
Yeah.
call it, the return value 4 will print, and we just gave the function name, so it printed the address of the function.
Yeah, so you have mentioned the function name, but you have really not have invoked the function. So invoking of the function, not invoking of the function was causing this kind of error. And now that you have understood the error, sort of, that function is working properly. So this is a simple issue in which the function, function name is different from function being invoked. And sometimes this error can also occur, that can lead to problem with the code. Moving on. So if you look at this particular piece of code, uh, what do you think could be the problem here?
Line number 6. 16.
Actually, that's an old convention of writing, so you can ignore that.
Okay.
So let me try to run it for you in. So let's say I enter 5. Sorry. Uh, let's say I enter 1, then I enter 4. And but the answer is 6. Now, if you look at the code, where it is going wrong?
We are taking the input of x and y, but printing the addition of x and z. I mean x and 5.
Yes. So again, here you have. Yes. So line number 25 is the error. Okay. So here you now we have to put it y. Now I'll briefly change something in the code, and then I'll ask you again what is the problem here. So I have changed something in the code. Okay, and but the old issue we have solved, and now I'll try to run it again. So here I enter 3, let's say, and then I enter 5, and still the problem is there. So now what is the problem?
We are returning minus x in 18, line number 18.
Yes. So these particular examples again, because the code base is small, it is very easier to localize these kind of problems. But again, the thing to take away from here, even though the example is not that complicated, and going forward I will in Python also, in tomorrow's class I'll show you how to debug a problem. So here because this is a short program, in this you really did not have any need of printing anything. But if it was something that was really a long program and it involved a lot of changing, then obviously you would go on to you know print and then see what the problem is. I think in one of the labs for debugging, I will give you a set of problems in which you will have to identify the cause of the errors for why the function is not working. So in this particular example also, printing values can be really useful when we go on to identifying the cause of the error. When you're working on Android applications, when you're really testing your apps, there's something called as the toast feature in the Android, which you can use to understand how the flow of the program is working. It's almost simple to the printing. If you don't want to see the printing comments in the compile time in the Android, you can see it in the toast. So in case of Android application, for printing specific messages in your app, you can use toast applications. Moving forward, although print statements are useful, but there are certain cons of using print statement, especially when the program is quite big. Debugging statements can quickly clutter up your code. So one important thing to remember is that suppose you start out with commenting or printing something, and then you run it and you have compiled, and now you have been able to identify what that printing statement was telling you, and based on that you modify your code. So once the purpose of that printing statement is over, you can remove that printing statement. Okay, because that was included only for purpose of debugging. When that purpose has been solved and you have sort of eliminated that, then you remove that print statement and go on further to identify the cause of the bug. The second thing is that debugging statement can cause you to both add and remove through code modification, which may introduce new bugs. So there is something called as software entropy. I will explain that to you later in detail in software testing. So when we work too much on modifying a code, then what happens is that we end up destabilizing that code. That increases the chaos inside a particular code, and that can lead to introduction of new bugs. So you have to follow a very clean approach of using print statements. Once the purpose behind that statement is over, you sort of remove those print statements. Okay. So although print statements are useful, sometimes they can be, cause some sort of discomfort when the code is flooded with the print statements, and that is why a clean approach is uh, suggested and recommended while using print statements for debugging. So after that, one of the most common causes of debugging is infinite recursion. One of the errors that you may have come across is maximum recursion depth exceeded error. So in this particular case, your program is not able to reach the base condition. So in this particular situation, using a print statement is quite useful. There are often situations called of infinite looping that can also cause our program, to terminate or give some sort of fault. So in that case, printing is really helpful, and printing is one of the very simple and convenient tools to be used in debugging, because basically what you're doing when you're using print is you're trying to identify the flow of your code. When you understand the flow of your code, then you can reason what is happening, and then you can try to localize the source of the error. So in case of infinite recursion, if the program or parameters do not seem to be moving towards the base case, you try to understand why. So basically, you're trying to understand the flow, and if the program is quite big, you cannot hand code or walk through your code. So using print statements, at least you can understand what is happening and then narrow down on the issue. There are certain things to remember while debugging. So first thing is you need to understand the message. Now these days, editors have an inbuilt debugger. So debugger themselves are able to identify the errors for you. But as a developer, you should be able to understand the error messages. So if you look at this particular code, what do you think is not quite right here?
Multi-line comment is started and not ended.
Okay. Anything else?
The header.
Header, sir.
So the library name has a spelling error in that, and if you were to run this code, it will throw up this kind of error. So no such file or directory found. So you should be able to read the errors if you can, because these days editors have an inbuilt debuggers. The task is greatly simplified, but even then we should have experience enough to understand those kind of error messages. What about this?
Name of void, is it required or some error?
Name of?
Int main of, void. What is it for? Or is it an error?
Uh, no, because mainly the function mainly is not taking any argument, so it's just written void. Notice carefully what is it missing.
Yes,
So,
already someone said that there is
yeah, so semicolon is missing at the end of the printf. So again, when you would run this program, this will, it is fairly easier to understand this kind of error. So although these are very simple examples, but the point that has to be taken is that there are multiple kinds of error. There are runtime errors, there are semantic errors, and semantic errors are much more difficult to identify than runtime errors. And the errors that you get while you're compiling the code are mostly runtime errors. Why are they called runtime errors?
Because they're caused while runtime.
Because they will not occur unless and until you try to run your program. Okay. What about this? So there is a typo in the printf. It's written as printf. So again, the error here it will show is that in the main function undefined reference to printf. So no such method found. So it is crucial to understand the error messages when you are trying to debug your program, because if you have understood it, then it will make the way a bit clear to identify the source of the error that you are seeing. So if we come to the runtime errors, runtime errors are basically those that do not appear until you run the program. These errors are also called as exceptions, and they usually indicate something exceptional bad has happened. Uh, and in testing, in software testing, we will talk about something called as assert, in which you can use assert functions to yourself identify if there are any problems in the function that you have created. Few of the causes behind runtime errors could be, array indexes out of bounds or improper use of pointers, accessing null pointers or invalid passing of arguments to functions. So runtime errors are quite serious because they terminate your program in the between, and at least from the debuggers compiling output, it is easier to understand. And sometimes an error occurs, we don't really understand it, so we try to Google it and try to understand what it means and try to gain sufficient knowledge about that error, and then come back to a program and see how it is happening. So first step towards debugging, and if you are using an inbuilt debugger unit editor, learn to understand the error messages. So that is extremely important when you want to debugging your piece of code. So there are certain exception errors, certain runtime errors that you often come across. So what do you think is the name error? Any guesses what could the name error or name exception mean in runtime error?
Now, when we access a variable before declaring it.
Yes. So you are trying to use a variable that doesn't really exist in the current environment, and so that could be causing the name error. And another is attribute error. So when does this kind of error arises, or when does this kind of exception arise?
When the object or class does not have that particular attribute.
Okay. So basically, as mentioned by Gaurav, you're trying to access an attribute or method that doesn't really exist. So that causes an attribute error. What about type error? So these are the most common type of runtime errors you will notice. What about the type error?
Different variable types. We are putting a number in terms of string variable.
Yes, definitely. And sometimes when we are dealing with int or strings, mostly we may not make these errors, but when we are dealing with certain complex data types, then we can quickly form prey to the type error. So when type error occurs, basically when there is a mismatch in the variable type and the value assigned, or when you're trying to pass wrong number of arguments to a function or method. Next comes is key error. So any takers?
In maps, if we try to access the key that doesn't exist.
Okay, yes. Or you're trying to access a key of an element of a dictionary or any other, data type which has a key attribute using a key value that, doesn't really exist. And lastly, the index error, quite common error.
Array index greater than length of the array.
Out of bounds, yeah. So the index you are trying to access a list is greater than its length, -1. And in that particular situation, adding a print statement to display the value of index is really very useful. So these are the kind of exception errors, also called as the runtime errors. Runtime errors because you have to run the program to be able to identify the errors. But there is a certain set of errors, which are semantic errors. Now, but before I discuss semantic errors, any guesses what a semantic error would mean? And how is it different from a runtime error?
It doesn't have a particular meaning. Semantic generally means meaning.
Okay, so semantic error, generally means that your program at debugging or compiling may not be showing any error. It could have been executed flawlessly and your compiler has not thrown any kind of runtime exception, but still the output that you are getting is not what you're expecting. And these kind of errors are very difficult to locate and diagnose, and they need a systematic approach. And tomorrow I will try to show you one of the examples in Python of a semantic error. So when you come across, so semantic error generally is a problem in which a program that runs without producing any error, but it is not doing the right thing. So a simple example could be that, an expression may not be evaluated in order you expect. So you're supposed to do something using an expression. That expression is computing some value, but that value is not what is expected. So in that particular situation, it really boils down to what your program is really doing. And semantic errors are very hard to debug because the compiler and runtime system are not providing any information about what is wrong. So in that case, you really have to, go about the piece of code. And in the last class, as Tarun had mentioned about rubber duck debugging, in case of semantic errors, you might have to, take support of something called as rubber duck debugging, in which you're really trying to understand and walk through the code and trying to understand, what it is doing. And definitely when you're trying to understand, print statements will come into the picture because you are trying to understand the flow of the code and printing at every position of, at least where the possible error is occurring. So semantic errors, remember, they are different from runtime errors. Semantic error basically means that something is wrong with the logic of the system, but a poor logic is not showing up in the error in the, during the compilation. And these are extremely challenging to debug and also quite interesting also to debug. So tomorrow I will try to show you one of the examples of semantic debugging, starting in the class. But let's say that you have tried everything. So your program threw some runtime errors, it threw some semantic errors, and you're trying to do everything, but your program is still not working. So in that kind of situation, there are certain questions that you need to ask. So is there something the program was supposed to do, but which it doesn't seem to be happening? Then you need to find the section of code that performs that particular function. So again, to be able to identify that piece of function in the code that is responsible for the output, you need to be well versed with the code. And then you really go on to understanding that piece. Okay. And and then you need to validate it, that is it the section that really is responsible. And sometimes we often invoke functions that are standard, so then you need to go back to read the function definitions. Most common this thing is observed, when you are trying to, let's say in Python, you are trying to create some model, and the definition of that particular model, the function invocation is very different in the documentation, and what you require is a bit of tweaking of that particular code or tweaking of that particular section. Then you really need to read the documentation of the function that you are trying to invoke in the system, and then try to identify its right usage. But sometimes, you know what can happen is that in order to program, you should have a mental model of what the program is supposed to do. If you are also operating in an arbitrary environment and sort of dependent on the output of your program rather than being the master of it and trying to understand what is happening, then it can be very challenging to narrow down on the problem. So if you have written a program that does not work as you expect, and there are no runtime errors, you see semantic errors, then there is a chance that the problem is with how you have coded or the mental model, how the thought process you have deployed behind creating that particular solution. So that is where the error really lies. So now you need to correct that mental model, because the code that you're writing in the editor is a reflection of your mental model. And if it's not achieving what it is expected to, then definitely the way you are thinking about the problem is lacking short of something. So then you need to go back to the thought process behind it. Okay, so that is what we understand by correcting the mental model. And once you have identified the discrepancy in your thought process, then you can solve it, and then you can build and test the components. So for most of the times what happens is, long expressions can be very hard to debug. So rather than writing, because this is also coming back from the practice of coding, sometimes debugging is made difficult by poor quality of coding. Even though you have identified the source of the problem or a basic chunk in the code base, but if the chunk has been written in a very dirty manner, then it will be a nightmare to identify the real cause of the problem. So whenever you come across big expressions, or you yourself write such big expressions, it is always advised to break down this huge piece of, literally incomprehensive piece of code, and simplify it. Most of the times we take a very surprising pride in writing simple things in a complex manner, but I think it should be the other way around, because simplicity is really very challenging. So never write big expressions, even though you are tempted to. Always simplify your code and code quality, because later on when you will be in the position of trying to understand the source of the error, then it will really help you to locate and localize the suspected error. So try to link coding quality with debugging. After few years, when you will be working on someone else's code, I think you will be able to understand better what you learned here in terms of coding quality, because the way the code has been written has a huge influence on how convenient it will be to debug that piece of code. It is had been written in a very chaotic manner, then definitely debugging that piece of code would not only be difficult, but because you are a good coder, you would actually go on to rewrite that entire piece of code in a simple manner, so that no one else after you suffers from working on that piece of code. The other kind of situation is that rather than returning directly, store this value that is to be returned and return that particular value, because in that case you can see before returning whether or not the value that is being returned is what you expect. So then you can display the value of count in this particular example before returning. So they are very small things that are useful while debugging the piece of code, and that can really make debugging quite convenient. Most of the times what I have also seen in my personal experience is that when I'm trying to debug a piece of code, uh, and I come across as something which is not written in a very good manner, or it is written in a manner which is complicated for understanding, not only for me but for the other developer, then I should not stop at just fixing the solution, so fixing the problem, but I should also go a step forward and try to fix certain other problems in the code as well. Of course, with the review with my managers or technical team members, so that I can also point out the other problems with the code now that it has come into my notice. So because the more you practice all these kind of things, the better you become at all these kind of things. So these are particular examples when you can sort of minimize the problems in debugging. In tomorrow's class, I will try to show you an example of semantic error in which the program is supposed to return whether or not an array is a palindrome or not, and how even though it is able to run properly, there is no runtime error, but the result that it returns it's almost always wrong. So do attend tomorrow's class, and I'll start off with that Python example. And even though you don't know Python, that's not a problem because we'll move in a very systematic manner, and I will try to explain to you the binary approach to debugging the problem in the code. So we will continue our discussion tomorrow. So in today's class, I'll just revise it for you. We sort of talked about debugging by induction and by deduction and backtracking. But again, I urged you not to get lost in terminologies, but to really understand the concept and the thought process behind this term. Then we looked at some of the examples of error messages and how important it is to understand the error messages that the compiler is throwing. Then we talked about certain examples of error messages, and then we learned the importance of print statements and how we can understand coding quality and improve it so that debugging is not much of a problem. In tomorrow's class, today we also learned about the runtime errors and the different types of runtime errors and semantic errors, which are the program may be running flawlessly, but it is not doing what is expected. So that's a semantic error, and these are much more harder to debug. So in tomorrow's class, I think I'll talk about one of the examples that will take us most of our time. And yeah, so we'll continue our discussion on debugging tomorrow and hopefully wrap up debugging. And I think some of the lab sessions, I will give you some set of programs with some errors, and I'll ask you to locate the errors and fix the programs. Yeah, so that is all for today. So we meet tomorrow again. But please attend tomorrow's class because using tomorrow's example, I will try to show you how to think while debugging. The goal is not to quickly do everything. The goal is to learn how to approach solving and identifying a bug in a program. So that is all from my side for today. Thank you so much for your time and patience.
Thank you, ma'am.